Hello, everyone, and welcome back to AUDIOACUHO, the podcast where we connect housing professionals within OACUHO and throughout Canada to discuss the topics that are important to the members, by the members, for the members. I'm Jay Copeland, Residence Life Coordinator, Humber College.
And I'm Ryan Doherty, Residence Life Facilitator at Ryerson University.
And we will be your OACUHOs for the show. Today we'll be speaking with Savannah Sloat, Assistant Dean of Residence Life, Wordsworth College from the University of Toronto. Always love the U of T titles. And Jenny Tabar, Manager of Residence Life at the University of Waterloo, to discuss the OACUHO Ethnic Diversity Project.
Jenny and Savannah have been some of the key drivers of the OACUHO Ethnic Diversity Project and then subsequent projects from that. Jenny was one of the leads at the launch of the project, and since the project has been released, Savannah has been brought on as the project coordinator of the Ethnic Diversity Project. We thought it would be a great opportunity to bring Jenny on to share the history of the project, and then Savannah can share the future of the project and hopefully some ideas about what's next. So why don't we start from the beginning? What is the Ethnic Diversity Project and how did it get started?
Yeah, do you want me to take it from here?
Yeah, if you could let us know, Jenny, I believe you might be in the best position to talk to that point.
That sounds great. Yeah, so originally the Ethnic Diversity Project was coordinated as part of the Member at Large portfolio when I was on the board in 2017. At that time, there had been a few points that had been raised. I think in the Pulse there had been an article that had been raised by Amin Lit about the lack of ethnic diversity in the field. And then there had been a presentation at the spring conference by Amin Lit and Brian Cunha called The Elephant in the Room, Exploring Ethnic Diversity in Student Housing. And it was the start of a conversation, or I'd say start of a louder conversation happening within some members of the association about just the lack of diversity, and just the general idea that we should be having this conversation because we do, like, it was kind of the first time I was hearing personally that we were acknowledging that it was a pretty white field. And so the history of the project is, when I joined the board in 2017, at the time, members at large could dedicate their year essentially towards a project that served an identified need in the association. And the board agreed that this was definitely an interesting and needed topic to be discussed. And so, the board essentially dedicated a member at large to facilitate dialogue around the project. And I was fortunate enough to take it on in 2017, obviously alongside a small but mighty team. I should shout out to the subcommittee leads, Ife, Carmen, and Dirk, who were just amazing teammates to work alongside. But yeah, that's a bit of the history.
Great. And it sounds like just having a little read through of like some of the executive summaries from it, it sounds like there were a fair amount of like interesting findings from those those sort of initial years and where they've kind of brought us now. What were the things that you were noticing with that team initially while you were doing the project? Sure.
So yeah, I mean, and as part of the project, we conducted surveys, we did focus groups, we did individual interviews, and what came out was a number of stories and experiences of the experience of professionals of color working in housing. And the main piece that I think came out was just it has an impact to work in a field that isn't mostly white, majority white. There were a lot of things that I think could easily be maybe brushed aside as not too serious, but once you look into it, it's repeated. It feels like it can be a really difficult thing to do. And so, if you're looking for are you looking for kind of summary pieces of what we pulled out?
I was just interested in knowing what your opinions is like some of the more interesting things that you found would be, and some of the important ones that like really sort of set the project off potentially in its current direction with Savannah.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we found was we did a survey to find what was the representation. And so what we did find was about 22% of respondents of a survey that was sent out to the association identified as persons of color. And we did find that the number, kind of the percentage of persons of color drops as you go higher up into the organization. So the largest percentage of persons of color is within the new professionals group.
Like as you go up the management structure kind of thing?
Yeah, that's right. That's
Okay.
right. Yeah. And so, like, for example, in the advanced level of the organization, there only 11% of respondents identified as persons of color.
Okay.
So what we find is just like a lack of representation, and like a question really of why is it that way, and what is the impact of having that lack of representation for both students and their experience of who they see in leadership roles, and in the roles of people who are essentially dictating their housing experience, as well as staff who are working in the field and don't see a lot of representation as you look up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you think there's anything to it, like a familiarity kind of thing, either from the top down or the bottom up, in terms of people wanting to be attracted into those higher roles because of who they're seeing there, or alternatively, like people who are hiring, and we all know there's hiring biases involved, like even if your name is a certain way and things like that. So I can imagine that's still present within everything. But I'm wondering if there was any kind of insights into, whether or not it's viewed as an attractive field to be in, given that the management structure, the sort of advanced level positions are predominantly like white male positions.
Yeah, I mean, I remember reading a story from one of the interviews about a person who was, a new professional, more or less, a few years into the field, and and seeing, like, looking up and essentially seeing that, like, if they were to advance, they would be working. Their peers would all be white. They'd be the only person in the room who was a person of color. And there's many ways to kind of respond to that, but what the person said was, either I'd have to look at it as being someone who can speak on behalf of persons of color and represent that cause, or I will, like, constantly feel like I'm needing to represent that group and the pressure essentially of what that comes with. So you're right in terms of what you're saying. Like, there were stories out there that did identify almost like a hesitation in terms of wanting to be in that role. But alternatively, it's important to also consider, like, the like you said, the hiring biases that exist and the barriers that exist for upward mobility in careers.
Right. Now, Jenny, you brought up an an interesting point in terms of just how few of our newer professionals actually progress onto mid-level and advanced member roles. And I think about across our association, we do run into challenges of burnout, right? And I think we we like to wax poetic about bringing your whole self to work and being fully authentic, but I wonder if the fact that we have so few advanced and senior members who are racialized, whether that prevents folks from from bringing their whole self to work, and whether that actually contributes to feelings of burnout because they can't be authentic, they can't be vulnerable. I think about a conversation that Savannah had mentioned back in June. She facilitated a webinar, and that was kind of just as we were really getting at the peak and at the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, the killing of Black and Indigenous people, and the emotional toll that would have had on our Black and Indigenous staff, and our colleagues would have been incredible. And if there aren't those other racialized folks, those racialized senior leaders checking in, that can really lead to more feelings of burnout, I imagine. What do y'all think about that?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for bringing that up, Ryan. I think that it's something that's often overlooked or not necessarily considered, that, when you have an identity that requires more relational experience when it comes to, your community or the people that you're connected to. And when you work in a structure that historically was designed to exclude you, like a university, there can often be some difficulty in navigating that, I think, for an individual. And speaking for myself as someone who is Indigenous but has mixed ancestry, I think that the implications of that is that you're constantly navigating this space where you're trying to explain aspects of your identity or do something that we call code switching, which is really kind of, appealing to the kind of main group, which in this case is like white folks, necessarily in housing when we think about it. And so there's that extra layer of like navigating your role, navigating the parts that are difficult about working in res life, and then also figuring out how you bring your identity into that, if it's safe to do so, and in what ways you can or can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I've got some questions just regarding the project itself. So, Jenny, you kind of began with the project. Savannah, you've inherited it. From both of your perspectives, like we kind of talked a little bit about where we started, and what were the main points there that then sort of have been carried on to move forward, and what are we working on now? What is the project looking at this point in time, and how to potentially move that into the future?
I can speak to kind of where the project ended from when I worked on it in 2018. The report was submitted to the association with a few recommendations. Broadly, the purpose of the report was to gather stories and experiences so that this could be something that we all, like the association, could look at and understand. I think that there were many people who wanted to have that conversation, and there were some people who were not willing at that time, or maybe not understanding that it was an issue. And so the purpose of essentially, like the goal of this, the goal at the end was to put together a series of experiences. And the recommendation to the board after that was to take a look at those experiences, identify some issues that exist that you can glean from those experiences, and address them, both as taking it on as a board, but also the report was directed as well to all of OACUHO members and all senior leaders to take what was in the report seriously, and to empower each other to engage with the topic, and essentially do our research, do your research, and dedicate time and resources to the issue. So at the end of it all, it was kind of passed along to the board, and I think I don't know if I can speak specifically to what happened in the years after, but maybe I'll pass it off to Savannah to take it on for like where it is right now.
Yeah.
Definitely. So when I kind of came on to the project, the board of directors had posted a role for the ethnic diversity coordinator. And the intention for that role was to take the recommendations from the report and action some of those on behalf of the association, but also to do some consulting work on the existing structure of the board, and reevaluating some of the pieces there in terms of how this work is kind of connected to what the board already does. And I think the reasoning was that they identified that there was a gap in terms of supporting specifically Black, Indigenous, and racialized staff in the association, and that structurally it wasn't necessarily designed with that in mind. And so the intention with bringing on this role was looking at the recommendations that were made from the report after it was finalized, and also to look at some of the structural sustainability to have this really connected to the work that the board does, and really intentionally reflected in the values of the association.
And so how have we been able to change what the board does, or maybe we haven't, and what can that look like?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. So I will say that I think the board has been very intentional about doing some reflection on its structures. And so a lot of the things have actually been happening, I would say, like behind the scenes. So, this year they were reviewing their strategic plan as part of the regular kind of timeline for where they would do that. And a lot of the consideration was around how do we build diversity and inclusion into our strategic plan to demonstrate that this is a core value and that it's represented in all of the things that we do. Some other things that we've been looking at are kind of structural pieces. So my role was brought on for a 1-year term. And so, what does that look like when the term is done? Where does this live in the board? And how does it continue? And so, some of those structural pieces were there to look at longevity.
Mhm.
Some of the other kind of intentional projects that we were looking at were in kind of key areas. So, one of which is providing support for BIPOC members of the association to really help them with, retention and supporting pieces of their identity. So, as Jenny noted, representation in the board from BIPOC folks is kind of strongly skewed to the new professionals. And some of us who have persisted in the field now, in a recent survey, I saw that things are kind of evening out between new professionals and mid-level professionals, but we still see very little representation from senior level and advanced level professionals. And so the board is looking at ways to support retention among BIPOC folks in the association. And so we're actually looking at creating a BIPOC network through OACUHO that will allow the opportunity for BIPOC professionals to connect and to foster professional development within the association, which I think is a really cool initiative.
It's very interesting. What is this? I'm just curious about this network that would be creative. What kind of form does that look like? How would it sort of play out in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually sent out a survey to the association for self-identifying BIPOC folks to contribute and give some insights around what that would look like. And so the majority kind of responded and said that having the opportunity to connect regularly as part of an affinity group would be valuable in terms of talking about experience, identifying areas for professional development, but also looking at ways in which we can support research and understanding in the field in ways where it intersects with BIPOC identities. So in terms of that, we're hoping to start in October with a regular monthly meeting where we get together and have facilitated discussion. And so I will be kind of taking that on for, the remainder of my term. And then the board is looking at where that affinity network will live in terms of how it will continue to move forward and be facilitated by the board. And so I'll be working with them on that. But one of the things that it brings up is this idea that we can support identity-based networks and connections within the association. One of the other key pieces of this, and I have to shout out Kamachi at Waterloo, who manages the membership engagement portfolio, is that currently the OACUHO Connect mentorship program is for the first time including an opportunity for staff to self-identify as BIPOC and to be connected with other staff who also self-identify as BIPOC to try and build those one-on-one connections, which I think is really great.
That's excellent.
Yeah, it sounds like a great initiative.
That was definitely a key piece that came out in the report, like the experiences of the different experiences of mentorship that folks experience, whether they are mentors or mentees at various levels in their housing career. And what I thought was really interesting was reading about the experiences of folks who identify as persons of color who have had experiences with like both white supervisors and racialized supervisors, and they were like the stories were really poignant in terms of to share an identity. To have a shared identity opens the gateway to a lot of really great coaching conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't necessarily mean, there were stories in the report about folks who had white supervisors that had really great coaching conversations, as long as that supervisor was willing to have a conversation about identity and positionality and what that could mean in the workplace, and being brave to have that conversation and having that trust. But there were experiences where folks did not have, unfortunately, those types of coaching conversations, or that type of trust was not there, and so a lot was missed. Like there was essentially a lost opportunity for mentorship and coaching in their experience.
I think there's something to be said about the mentorship piece, just like in general, and how important it is to find people with, similar experiences and values as you, to be a mentor to you when you're getting involved in, this as a career. Because I've participated a number of years now in the student professional staff mentorship kind of thing that OACUHO offers, and sometimes it's great, and you get a fantastic person who you connect with really well, and then you get someone who's in a position that you really don't know how to help them with, because you're not familiar with it, or has experiences that are different than yours, and it's just I want to help you, but I don't know how. And some more often than not, I find those conversations kind of fall through because they just, as a mentee, if you will, don't necessarily see the value in you as a mentor, because they can't connect with you on any level that's personal to them and things. So I can only imagine how having mentorship representation and the ability to have connections and, network with people who can guide you and have been through these scenarios would be beneficial to, the membership and, people in general.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is true. I think it's important for folks in positions of power, when you recognize that you're in a mentorship position and you have the ability to coach someone, you need to check in with yourself about your identity and their identity, and consider, or how they identify specifically, and consider the ways that your identity can either interfere or elevate the coaching experience.
Mm-hmm.
There was a really great story that came out in the report that was essentially about getting prepared to go to conferences. I don't know if you all remember, but when early in your career, going to conferences for the first time, your supervisor may talk to you about this is what you should do when you go to the conference. Make sure you talk to people. Make sure you trade business cards or trade emails. And you get some good tips about how to interact at the conference. But one person explained that no one ever warned them that when they would go to the conference, that the only person who looked like them out of the 100 people at the conference were a few new level professionals, and folks who were serving the food. And I thought that was a really strong example of that person felt kind of on their own. They felt isolated and shocked by the experience, and they explained to me that they knew that if they had, or they felt that if they had had a racialized supervisor, maybe that supervisor might have had a brave conversation with them about what it would be like to walk into that, and how, and help them process that. And what the person said was that when I talked to my supervisor about going to the conference, that's not at all, that wasn't on their radar at all. And they had to deal with that and carry that burden after the conference, and what that felt like.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if, as long as folks are reading the report, I hope that folks are more alive to what our association actually looks like, right? And so you can actually equip people with the language and the understanding to actually have these conversations, even if you are, say, a senior member who is a white male. If you're aware of the context, you can have those conversations to better support your staff. I guess a question that I have is, reading the report, I think there's a lot of large structural things that need to happen, and a lot of things that need to come from our senior members, our advanced members. And I can imagine as a mid-level or a new professional, at times reading something like this can feel quite overwhelming. If you are, we'll say, a well-meaning white person who does make up 70-something% of our new professionals, what are the types of things that they have control over, that they can create a better environment for their colleagues, that they can foster more new professionals coming into the field? Are there recommendations about that, or do folks have ideas about that?
I think that that's a great question, Ryan, and something to think about, because it's kind of the tenuous piece of this work when you think about who it's for. And so, a large part of this project is really to support BIPOC members who are here and to promote more diversity and inclusion in the field through some of those hiring practices and getting folks in. And then it's about, retention and ensuring that they don't, burn out or opt out in terms of, leaving the field. But I've had a lot of conversations with folks who, hold dominant white identities, who are kind of like, well, what do I do? And I try not to use the word allyship, because I think that ally is a very complex term and often doesn't really get at what we want it to do. But I think that what white professionals in the field need to be mindful of is really examining their privilege and their ability to kind of navigate the field in a different way and mobilizing that to support some change in the association. And I think part of that is, asking for professional development that includes social justice, diversity, and inclusion. I think part of that is promoting opportunities to have these conversations. And I do think a lot of that is doing learning for ourselves so that there is that level of awareness. And I think the difficulty with identity work and social justice work is acknowledging that it needs to be a selfless act. It's not something that we do in order to be able to say that we have this knowledge or hold this knowledge, or to be able to say, I've completed this and now I'm a inclusive, socially aware person, but acknowledging that, it's something that we do for other people, and it's something that is ongoing, and that, it's messy and we make mistakes, and that we need to work through those in a way that doesn't center ourselves.
Yeah. It's a very work in progress type of thing, I find. And I've been thankful that a number of ethnic diversity sort of trainings and different events have come up over the past few months that I'm able to attend as a professional to get more in tune with what's happening, because it's, people live this their entire lives. And I can't expect to just be caught up in I've got my certificate with my name on it in a day, let's be honest, not a day, like an hour to 3 hours of training or speaking or listening to someone have a dialogue. It has to be an ongoing process that we take on ourselves to engage in these things and, learn with other professionals and come to develop the same kind of inner monologues around the topic together and create those outer dialogues between people to make it a more known and spoken about thing and create those opportunities for education, understanding, etc.
Yeah, I'm a huge NBA fan, and I don't know if y'all have seen in the bubble they have all the sayings on the back: Black Lives Matter, education reform, and all of that. But I just shake my head. There are two athletes who are white athletes, and what they chose to write on the back is ally. And I have struggled with that, because I'm like, oh, that's not a title that you can just throw upon yourself. And I think it is really challenging. When I think about myself, I'm in a relationship with a Black woman, and I still consistently mess up, and I would love to be like, yes, I've arrived, I am an ally. But it doesn't work like that, right? And I think as we've been talking about, it's not getting the certificate and now you're an ally, now you're the good supportive white colleague, or it doesn't work like that. It is that constant work.
Yeah, totally. I mean, shout out to the well-meaning white yeah, it doesn't work like that. We have to acknowledge we're all like we're not experts. Like it's the last thing I would call myself. And I think what you have to do if you're to go back to your question, Jay, about like what would you kind of like ask of the well-meaning white friends,
Mm-hmm.
and it's to like be to just like grip yourself and understand that you have nothing to lose by making this conversation a priority and demanding that it becomes a priority on your teams if it's not happening, doing that with respect, and not doing it in a way where you're like some savior of sorts, but but centering the conversation, not centering yourself, but making the conversation a common conversation. Like at the very least, I want something I threw out in the report as a recommendation is take the questions that are asked in the report and throw one of those questions on every agenda. Like start a weekly meeting with a conversation about this topic, or find ways to bring it up, in your teams. Like I heard about a team doing like a book club with their team, like prioritizing that they would dedicate time and energy and like thoughtfulness towards learning this topic together and asking questions together and seeing and having real conversations about how what they're reading applies to what they're doing at work. It doesn't need to be like everybody's attacking like a huge strategy for their department and being the champions for that topic, because it's not possible. Like we have to be realistic about what's possible and what's within our authority, but there are little things that we can do to center the conversation, and use your power, because you have to remember you have nothing to lose if you're a white person.
Yes, Jenny, I love the idea of the book club, especially now in our current economic context, where at least here at Ryerson, our residence population is significantly less, and so I imagine there will be less money available for conferences and certificates and all of that. I'm making my assumptions. If
Totally.
Ryerson wants to send me to a bunch of conferences, that's great. But I think a book club is actually quite affordable PD. And I know one of the books that I've ordered and I'm waiting for it to come in is They Said This Would Be Fun. I don't know if folks have seen it. The author's name is Eternity Martis, I believe, and she talks about her time at Western as a Black woman, specifically in residence, and how her university experience didn't necessarily map onto the TV depiction, the mainstream media depiction of what university is going to feel like.
Yeah.
I think everyone's getting a heavy dose of it not mapping out to the TV depiction this year. But no, absolutely. I love the action items, Jenny. I think that's great. Like even if it's just a little, throw a question from the project itself into your meetings. It's something quick and simple that people can do. Is there any other suggestions that we have for how we can get people involved in having these conversations, or things that we've seen done that might help other people in other institutions sort of facilitate the same kind of dialogue? And where do we go from here?
Yeah, absolutely. So earlier this summer, I did facilitate a webinar around empowering staff to have social justice conversations. We had 70 attendees, which was really wonderful, and is something that I think the board wants to do more of. And so I'm looking at opportunities this fall to offer an additional webinar, or maybe even a series of things that focus on kind of those core social justice dialogue skills. But also, one of the things that the board is looking at is how do we support institutions in changing some of their practices? And so part of that is, hiring practices and looking at how inclusive they are, or where the barriers are for folks even, applying to be like an RA or a DON. And the implications of that, because the diversity of our field really starts with our student staff, and so that's a project that they're looking at. And then also looking at training and the ways in which we prepare our student staff to engage in these conversations, and the ways in which we allow them to bring their identity and advocacy to their work. And so those are some of the things that we're hoping to present to the association this fall, in terms of opportunities to connect. which is awesome. The BIPOC network will hopefully be getting off the ground for October. And so folks should be getting an email from me through the listserv about participating in that if they self-identify. And I believe we are probably going to be releasing some more articles in the Pulse that people can connect with. But I would ask that anybody who wants to get involved, feel free to reach out to me. And I think that goes a long way in terms of demonstrating that there's a need and a want to engage.
Fantastic. Oh, that's great. And I love what you said about, going right down to the diversity starts with like our frontline staff, if you will. And I'd say even a little bit beyond that, because in my mind, always like when you're hiring a staff, it should be representative, like a small representation of your overall population. And so you should see that diversity within the staff and make sure that when we're connecting with the students or new residents that are like moving in, that they have someone that they can use as a mentor that they relate to and have shared experiences with, and make sure that we're getting those like minority groups more involved with what we do, so that we can bring them up into the sort of upper echelons of residents and how things work here, because nobody sets out, as far as I know, and I have yet to meet anyone yet in even our profession that was like, when I was growing up and I came to school, I wanted to be a residence life coordinator, residence manager. It's like they're like firemen, right? So like it starts with us. If we want to pull people into this, we have to convince them that what they're studying is probably not as good as what we already do here, and that they should use that as a ticket to say they have a bachelor's or a master's to get those higher level positions in residence later on.
The hiring is complicated though with the student staff, because I haven't been at an institution where we didn't use some sort of carousel hiring process where our current student staff had some input, whether it was scoring or facilitating activities and all of that. And I think right now I feel stuck in a way that I can't conceptualize a hiring process that doesn't involve our current student staff. But I recognize that when our current student staff are involved, it just reinforces hiring more of the same, because when they're evaluating, they're looking for people who embody the same characteristics as them or the colleagues that they liked working with. So we see their scores reflecting that. And I think like what we've done at Ryerson in the past is we look at our scores and we start placing people. And then once we have our team placed, we take a second look at, okay, who are our racialized staff or racialized candidates who didn't initially get placed, and how much of that is the some sort of like corrective factor of they don't reflect the same identity as I do, and giving some of those folks a second look. Because if we just go on numbers, sometimes those folks aren't getting placed.
Yeah, absolutely. Or they kind of trend lower in terms of scoring.
Yes.
And I think part of that is like, how do we prepare our staff to participate in that process? And what kind of training do we provide them to even have an awareness of, hiring bias or their own individual bias based on their social location? And so can we facilitate more of those conversations going into that process?
Yeah, I have been a part of processes now more recently that we've gotten rid of the carousel hiring in favor of more individual sort of processes, because we viewed most of what you'd learn in a carousel as being something that was a trainable kind of skill that you could practice and get used to. So it was one of those things where it's like, is there much value in this when we intimidate a certain kind of people by placing them in a group with people who seem to be a totally different way than them, and then they don't engage as much, and we don't see, are we really giving them a fair opportunity to show their skills and highlight their strengths to us? And we were just like, let's try it without. And at first I was kind of critical of it. I was like, I don't know, I really like the carousel. But seeing it from the other point of view was a nice eye-opener for me to be like, you know what, I don't think it's necessary. We didn't really need it, and we've hired some great people despite not having included it.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd add about the hiring conversation is like taking a look at your questions and making sure that at least one, if not more, of your questions do speak to getting a sense of the candidate's comfort with supporting diverse audiences. or perhaps sharing, if like within reason, like providing a question that provides an opportunity for candidates to share their experience with diversity, whether supporting audiences or their own lived experience. And I think when you do that, you make space for those kinds of skills, and you make space for like prioritizing those skills in the rubrics, but also you get to see within maybe like white or white passing candidates, you see whether they are rising to the top with their diversity knowledge and or like their comfort with that. Whereas I think sometimes it's not quite the case. So
fantastic suggestion. Well, I think we're at the point where we're starting to look like we're getting to the end here. So I'm just wondering if we have any closing thoughts or words. I know, Savannah, you originally reached out to us hoping to discuss the project, and I thought that was a great idea. So is there anything that we haven't covered yet that you'd like to let people know about before we wrap it up for the day?
No, I think it's been a great conversation. My intention was really just to let folks know that this work was happening and really draw attention to, the original report that Jenny and her amazing committee of folks put together. Now that, it's been a couple of years out from the end of the report, we just want to ensure that folks are returning to it and reading it and knowing that it's there. And then being able to connect with the work. So the opportunity to be here and chat about it was really amazing.
Well, we enjoyed our time as well, I think, Ryan?
Yeah, and so one of the things, if you are a listener and you're hearing us refer to the Ethnic Diversity Project and the reports and all of that, what we can do is we can attach the link to where you can find the project on this podcast, just in the description there. So for folks who do want to read it after hearing this, that you will be able to find it.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess we'll call that for the day. So thank you so much, Savannah and Jenny, for joining us today. Ryan and I have both had an enlightening conversation with you. It's been a great 40-ish minutes. And I think this was a great topic for us to discuss. We really appreciate you coming on and, going through it with us so that anyone who was listening could understand like what this is, where it started, and even takeaways for what they can do to start helping with raising awareness or incorporating the sort of outcomes that you've listed in some of their own practices here. So thanks again for joining us.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks.
All right. And if you want to continue the conversation on this topic, please feel free to contact Savannah at savannah.sloat@utoronto.ca. That's SAVANNA dot. Sorry, I forgot an H there. Let me try this again. SAVANNA.SLOAT@utoronto.ca. Or you can get a hold of myself, Ryan, at ryan.doherty@ryerson.ca, or Jay at jason.copeland@humber.ca. We'd love to hear from you if you are interested in participating in the podcast.
Yeah, we've got a great lineup coming up as we move through the remainder of 2020 and starting into 2021. We do still have some spaces open for this academic year, so please do reach out to us with a topic that you're interested in, and we'd love to hear from you. Until next time on Audio ACUHO.